1 week after the strike, the Galactic Concord gathered for the most important assembly session in 12,000 years. Every species sent representatives, and the chamber was so crowded that overflow areas had to be opened in adjacent sections of the station. Ambassador Yu Mirei stood at the central podium, wearing the same dark blue formal wear she had worn on the day of the original vote, and she waited patiently for the speaker to call the session. To order the crystalline being's light scattered across the chamber. As it spoke, this session has been called to address the actions of the human Alliance on the night now referred to in our records as the Night of Thunder, the speaker announced. Ambassador Yoon will present humanity's position, after which the assembly will determine appropriate response. Yoon stepped forward and looked out at the hundreds of alien faces watching her, representatives of the Galactic Concord. She began. 1 week ago, humanity did something that had never been done before in the history of this alliance. She paused. We fought back. The chamber was silent. For 40 years, humanity has been a member of this Concord, and in that time, we have watched the treaties that supposedly protect all members be used as weapons against the weak. She touched a control, and a display activated, showing a timeline stretching back thousands of years. The Ancestral Reclamation Clause has been used 412 times since it was introduced, she said. In every single case, a more powerful species used it to take territory from a weaker one. And in every single case, the assembly ruled in favor of the aggressor. She let the numbers sink in. 216 million beings have been displaced by this single clause. She continued. 17 species have been reduced to refugee populations with no homeworlds, and 3 species have gone extinct entirely because they had nowhere left to go. The display changed to show a map of Keth territorial expansion over the centuries. The Keth Dominion alone has used these mechanisms to grow their empire by 300% since joining the Concord. Yoon said, they have never fought a single war because they have never needed to. Because the treaties did their conquering for them. Council of Earth, the new leader of the Keth delegation, rose to speak. The human representative speaks as if our species is uniquely guilty, he said, his tone carefully neutral. But many species have used the same mechanisms, and the assembly has always found our claims valid. You nodded. You are correct. Counselor, she said, the Keth are not unique. They are simply the most successful, and that is exactly my point. She turned back to the full assembly. The treaties of this Concord were never designed to create peace, she said. They were designed to create order, an order where the strong could take from the weak without the mésalliances of actual warfare. An order where theft was legalized and resistance was criminalized. She spread her hands. Humanity has broken that order, she said. We have demonstrated that the weak can fight back, that the strong are not invincible. That treaties mean nothing if they only protect those who need no protection. The chamber erupted into noise. Delegations shouting at each other and at the podium, and Yoon waited patiently for the chaos to subside when it finally did. She spoke again. I am not here to apologize, she said. I am here to offer you something better. She gestured, and Representative Vex of the Villani, Senator Crix of the Borath, Delegate Mora of the Silken Courts, and Observer Prime Velthus of the Neutral Accords rose from their seats and joined her at the podium. These 4 species, along with 18 others, have agreed to form a new coalition within the Concord, Yoon announced. This coalition will operate on a simple principle. An attack on any member is an attack on all members. And that principle will be enforced not by treaties that can be manipulated, but by the combined military and economic power of every coalition member. She looked directly at the delegation she knew had been planning claims against human territory. Any species that attempts to use legal mechanisms to steal from a coalition member will find themselves facing the same response that the Keth received, she said, "We will not wait for permission. We will not appeal to treaties that exist only to enable our exploitation. And we will not stop until the threat is eliminated." The chamber fell silent again. Senator Crick stepped forward. "My people have been paying tribute to the Keth for 300 years, he said. That tribute ended 1 week ago, and no one has come to collect." He looked at the Keth delegation. "For the first time in 3 centuries, my people are free. And we owe that freedom to humanity." Delegate Mora's silk-covered form rustled as she spoke. The silken cords have watched 6 allied species fall to aggression that the Concord refused to stop. She said, "We join this coalition because we refuse to be the 7th. Observer Prime Velthus, whose species had never spoken in the assembly before, stepped forward. We represent 12 species who are too small to defend ourselves," the ancient being said. "For thousands of years, we have survived by being useful to larger powers. And now, for the first time, we have a choice. And we choose to stand with those who would protect us rather than exploit us." The speaker's crystalline form flickered with agitation. What the human delegation proposes would fundamentally alter the structure of the Concord, it said. Such changes require unanimous approval from all member species. Yoon smiled. "We are not asking for approval," she said. "We are informing you of what is happening. And any species that wishes to join us is welcome. And any species that wishes to continue operating under the old system is free to do so." She paused. "But they should understand that the old system no longer has the power it once did." In the observation gallery, Kiralax watched history unfold with tears streaming from the archivist's compound eyes. The Veleth had recorded 12,000 years of Concord proceedings, and they had never seen anything like this, a species that had been traveling the stars for less than half a century was reshaping the entire galactic order, and they were doing it not through conquest or intimidation, but by offering something that had never existed before: hope. After the session ended, Yoon found Kirillax waiting outside her office. "I received your records," she said. They were invaluable. Kirillax's antennae dipped in acknowledgement. "I have something else to give you," the alchemist said. "The coalition species have discussed who should lead the new alliance, and they have chosen a speaker to represent them." Yoon raised an eyebrow. "They want me to take on another role?" Kirillax's mandibles clicked in what might have been a laugh. "No, Ambassador," the alchemist said. "They have chosen me." Yoon stared. "The Veleth have never held political positions," she said. "Your neutrality is the foundation of your role in the Concord." "Our neutrality was a shield," Kirillax replied. "It protected us because we were useful to everyone and threatening to no one. But it also meant we could never act, never speak, never do anything to stop the injustices we recorded." The archivist's eyes met Yoon's. "I am tired of watching," Kirillax said. "I want to help build something better." Yoon was quiet for a long moment. Then she extended her hand in the human gesture of agreement. "Welcome to the coalition." Speaker Kirillax, 3 months later. Admiral Park Seojin retired from military service. She had led the most successful military operation in human history, and she could not bear to command another. She moved to one of the 3 colony worlds that had been saved by the strike, and she spent her days working in the gardens that the colonists had planted when they returned home. Sometimes, visitors would come to meet the legendary admiral who had humbled the Keth Dominion, and she would politely decline to speak with them. She preferred to remember herself not as a warrior, but as a gardener, someone who had cleared away weeds so that better things could grow on Vareth Prime. The old Concord treaties were formally dissolved, and new ones were drafted to replace them. Speaker Kirillax read the final clause of the new agreement aloud to the assembly. "No species shall be compelled to surrender what they cannot be forced to defend." It was a promise and a warning. The galaxy had changed forever on the night humanity struck, and it would never change back. The 6 hours that followed the strike were the longest in galactic history on every world with access to communication networks. Beings of 1,000 different species watched and waited to see what would happen next. The Keth Dominion's government had retreated into emergency session, and no one outside their inner chambers knew what was being discussed. Meanwhile, humanity's message had spread across every corner of the galaxy, and it carried a truth that no one could ignore. The treaties meant nothing. Power meant everything. And humanity had just proven they understood. Both Admiral Park Seojin stood on the observation deck of her flagship, looking out at the wreckage of what had once been the Keth Dominion's largest military shipyard. Debris drifted silently through space, where 37 warships had been under construction. Just hours ago, 4,000 Keth military personnel had died in the strike. Park had reviewed every targeting solution personally, and she knew that number could have been much higher if humanity had been less careful. They had timed the strikes for shift changes, sent anonymous warnings to civilian areas, and used weapons designed to minimize collateral damage. But 4,000 beings were still dead, and Park would carry that weight for the rest of her life. Her aide approached quietly. "Admiral, Ambassador Yoon is requesting a secure channel." Park nodded and moved to her private office, where she activated the encrypted communication system. Yoon's face appeared on the display, and the ambassador looked as exhausted as Park felt. "It's done," Yoon said. "The Keth government has accepted our terms." Park closed her eyes and let out a breath she had been holding for hours. "All of them?" "All of them," Yoon confirmed. "Withdrawal of claims, full reparations, public acknowledgement. And they've added something extra on their own. Councillor Tethran has been removed from office and is being held for trial by their own people." Park shook her head slowly. "I never wanted this," she said quietly. "I joined the fleet to explore, to discover new worlds and new civilizations. And instead I've become the architect of the largest military strike in human history." Yoon's expression softened. "I know," she said. "None of us wanted this. But the alternative was watching our people become victims, watching other species carve up our territory piece by piece until there was nothing left." She paused. "You saved 2.3 million lives tonight, Admiral, and you saved countless more who would have been targeted in the years to come." Park opened her eyes and looked at the debris field one last time. "And I killed 4,000 beings who were just following orders," she said. "Their families will never forgive us, and honestly, I'm not sure I will either." Yoon had no answer for that. Some wounds did not heal on Verith Prime Station. The assembly reconvened to address the aftermath of what was already being called the Night of Thunder. Every delegation sent their most senior representatives, and the chamber was more crowded than it had been in centuries. The Keth Dominion's new leadership appeared via holographic projection, their former counselor notably absent. They read a prepared statement accepting all of humanity's terms and formally apologizing for their attempted territorial theft. But the assembly was not focused on the Keth. They were focused on humanity representative. Dex of the Vellani Communion rose to address the chamber. "The events of the past day have exposed a fundamental truth about our alliance," he said, his gills fluttering with emotion. "The treaties we have built our civilization upon are not instruments of peace. They are weapons of control." He looked around at the assembled delegations. How many of us have watched helplessly as stronger species use legal mechanisms to steal from weaker ones? How many of us have remained silent because we feared becoming the next target? Senator Crix of the Barath Republic stood next. "My people have paid tribute to the Keth Dominion for 300 years, he announced. "That tribute ends today, and if any species wishes to challenge that decision, I invite them to consider what humanity has just demonstrated is possible." The chamber buzzed with reaction. In the observation gallery, Kiralax watched. these speeches with growing wonder. Something was happening that the archivist had never seen before. The weak were finding their voices, and they were finding them because humanity had proven that the strong could be challenged after the session ended. Kirillix made a decision that violated every principle of Velith neutrality. The archivist accessed classified records that had been compiled over centuries, documents showing every territorial theft, every forced treaty, every act of aggression that had been legalized and sanitized by the Concord's bureaucratic machinery. Then Kirillix sent those records to Ambassador Yoon. The message attached was simple. You asked if we would help build something better. And this is what I can offer. The truth about what the old system really was. Yoon received the message in her quarters aboard the human diplomatic vessel. She read through the records for hours, her face growing grimmer with each new revelation. The Keth were not unique. 12 other species had made similar plans against humanity. Plans that were now being quietly abandoned across the galaxy, and the pattern went back thousands of years. An endless cycle of the powerful consuming the weak, while treaties provided the illusion of civilization. When she finished reading, Yoon contacted Admiral Park one final time. I've just received intelligence showing that our strike may have prevented a dozen future conflicts, she said. The other predator species are backing down, at least for now. Park's expression did not change. Good, she said, but we need to make sure this never happens again. Not to us, and not to anyone else. You nodded. That's exactly what I'm working on, she said. The Villani, the Borith, the Silken Courts, and a dozen smaller species have approached me about forming a new coalition. One that actually protects its members instead of enabling their exploitation. She paused. They want humanity to lead it. Park was quiet for a long moment. We're the youngest species in the Concord, she finally said. We've been traveling the stars for less than 50 years. And now they want us to lead a galactic coalition? Yoon smiled. They don't want us to lead because we're the oldest or the wisest, she said. They want us to lead because we're the first species in 12,000 years that had the courage to fight back. Park considered this. Then we better make sure we lead them somewhere worth going, she said. Outside her window, the debris of the Keth shipyard continued to drift through space, a monument to the night that changed everything. And somewhere in the vast darkness between the stars, the galaxy held its breath and waited to see what humanity would do next. The first explosion occurred at the Keth Dominion's primary shipyard in the Thyrix system, where 37 warships were under construction and another 12 were receiving repairs. A cargo container that had been delivered 6 months ago by a human trading company suddenly became something else entirely. The blast was so perfectly calculated that it took out the shipyard's main reactor without damaging the civilian station orbiting nearby. The second explosion happened 400 light-years away at the Keth Military Academy on Voss Prime, where the next generation of Dominion officers was training. The weapon had been hidden in the load of mining equipment that humans had sold to a Keth construction company 3 years earlier. Again, the targeting was precise beyond belief. The academy buildings vanished, but the city around them remained untouched. The third explosion, the fourth, the fifth, and onward across 31 star systems. Every major Keth military installation, supply depot, command center, shipyard, and weapons factory was hit simultaneously. The strikes lasted exactly 1 hour when they ended. The Keth Dominion had lost 73% of their military capability. They had not lost a single civilian. The precision was the message. Humanity could have killed millions. They chose not to. On Varith Prime Station, the assembly chamber descended into complete chaos as reports flooded in from across the galaxy. Delegates screamed at each other in languages their translators struggled to keep up with, and security forces rushed to protect representatives of species who feared they might be next. Councillor Tethron stood frozen at his delegation's podium. Watching his empire burn on the display screens that lined the chamber walls, his scales had gone pale. A sign of extreme shock in his species, and his forked tongue hung limp from his mouth as his brain struggled to process what was happening. 12,000 years of Keth military dominance had just ended in 60 minutes. The speaker called for order again and again, but nobody was listening. Then the main display activated, and Ambassador Yoon Murray's face appeared on the screen. The chamber fell silent. Representatives of the Galactic Concord. Yoon began, her voice calm and steady. Humanity has just demonstrated a capability that we have been developing since the day we joined this alliance. She paused to let that sink in. 35 years ago, we entered the galactic community full of hope and optimism, and it took us less than 5 years to understand the truth about how the Concord actually works. Her eyes swept across the chamber. The treaties protect the powerful, and the weak survive only as long as they remain useful or invisible. And when a strong species decides to take from a weaker one, the legal mechanisms exist to make that theft respectable. Tefren found his voice. "This is an act of war," he screamed. "You have attacked sovereign Keth territory across multiple systems, and you will face the consequences of your aggression." Yoon smiled. "Actually, Counselor, we have not attacked any Concord territory at all." She touched the control, and a map appeared on the display showing every strike location. Every weapon we deployed was launched from outside Concord space. She explained. Every strike team operated beyond Concord borders, and every target was hit by weapons that were placed before the territories in question became Keth-controlled. She let the implications settle. "We have followed the letter of every treaty this assembly has ever ratified, and we have broken the spirit of all of them, and we have done so in a way that proves exactly how meaningless these treaties truly are." The chamber erupted again, but this time the anger was mixed with something else. Fear. If humanity could do this to the Keth, they could do it to anyone. How many hidden weapons were scattered across the galaxy, waiting for orders that might never come? In the observation gallery, Kirillax watched with a mixture of horror and something that felt dangerously like hope. The archivist species had suffered under Keth aggression for centuries, and they had been too weak to fight back, too small to matter, too useful as neutral observers to destroy outright. But watching the mighty Keth Dominion, brought low in a single hour, was awakening feelings that Kirillax had never allowed to surface. Before feelings like satisfaction, feelings like justice, Ambassador Yoon continued speaking. "Humanity does not want war," she said. "We want peace, but we want real peace. Not the peace of predator and prey, not the peace of master and slave." She looked directly at Counselor Tefren. "We are prepared to end this conflict immediately under the following terms. The Keth Dominion will withdraw all territorial claims against humanity, effective immediately. And the Dominion will pay reparations to every human colonist who was forced to evacuate. And the Dominion will publicly acknowledge that their use of the Ancestral Reclamation Clause was a deliberate act of territorial theft." Tefran's scales flushed with color again, this time dark red with rage. "You dare to demand terms from us?" he hissed. "The Dominion will never submit to such humiliation. Then the Dominion will face consequences beyond anything you have experienced tonight." Yoon replied, and her voice carried no threat at all. "Only certainty. We know where your remaining 27% is located, Counselor, and we have weapons in place, and we are prepared to use them." She clasped her hands in front of her. "You have 6 hours to respond." The display went dark for a long moment. Nobody in the chamber moved or spoke. Then Counselor Tefren collapsed to the floor, his body shaking with a combination of rage and terror and the dawning realization that everything his species had built was now balanced on the edge of total destruction. The speaker finally regained control of the chamber. "This assembly will take a recess." The crystalline being announced. All delegations are advised to consult with their home governments, and security will be increased throughout the station, as delegates rush to their private chambers to send urgent messages across the galaxy. Kiralax remained in the observation gallery, watching the empty chamber below. The archivist pulled up the historical records of every species that had tried to resist Keth aggression over the past 1,000 years. Every single one had been crushed. Humanity was the first to strike back, and they had done so with a precision and coordination that should have been impossible for a species that had only been traveling the stars for a few decades. Kiralax began compiling a new file, a record of what was happening that would be preserved for future generations to study. The title of the file was simple: The Day the Treaties Died. Because whatever happened next, one thing was certain: the galaxy would never be the same. 36 hours after the assembly vote, the galaxy watched humanity run away. News broadcasts across 1,000 worlds showed the same images over and over again. Human evacuation ships departing from the 3 contested colonies in long lines, their running lights blinking against the darkness of space. Their cargo holds filled with families who had lost everything. The Keth Dominion released statements praising humanity's wisdom and cooperation, and Counselor Tethvern gave interviews to any media outlet that would listen. This is how young species learn their place, he said in one broadcast that spread across the galactic networks. The humans made the smart choice by not resisting, and we commend them for accepting reality. In the halls of power across dozens of species, officials watched these broadcasts and began making plans of their own. If the Keth could take 3 human worlds with nothing but legal paperwork, perhaps others could do the same. The Vorthic Collective began drafting a claim against human mining operations in the Kepler sector. The Dreth hierarchy dusted off old star charts showing territory they had abandoned centuries ago that humans now occupied. The Marani Trade Federation calculated how much profit they could extract from humanity once the young species understood their new position in the galactic order. Everyone agreed on one thing: humans were weak, they were young and naive, and had no understanding of how the galaxy truly worked. And now they would pay the price for their ignorance over and over again, until there was nothing left to take in the observation gallery of Vareth Prime. Archivist Kiralax worked late into the night cycle, reviewing records and cross-referencing data that most beings would find impossibly boring. But Kiralax had noticed something that would not let the archivist rest. The numbers did not match. Humanity had announced the evacuation of 2.3 million colonists from the 3 worlds, and they had dispatched enough transport vessels to carry exactly that many people. But the departure manifests from the colonies showed only 1.8 million beings had actually boarded those ships. 500,000 humans were missing from the evacuation. Kiralax checked the data 3 times, certain there must be an error, but the numbers remained the same. Where had those people gone? The archivist expanded the search, looking at human ship movements across the entire Concord space over the past 36 hours. And the pattern that emerged made Kiralax's mandibles click with nervous energy. Admiral Park, Seogen's 3rd Fleet had officially been assigned to escort the evacuation transports, but the fleet had broken into 17 smaller groups that were now spread across an impossibly wide area of space. They were nowhere near the evacuation routes, and their transponders kept flickering in and out, as if the ships were deliberately making themselves hard to track. Kiralax sat back from the data terminal and tried to understand what was happening. The Velith had watched civilizations rise and fall for eons, and they had developed instincts for recognizing when history was about to change direction. Those instincts were screaming now. Something was very wrong. Or perhaps something was very right in a private chamber on Vareth Prime Station. Ambassador Yoon My-rae met with 4 other delegates in complete secrecy, representative Vex of the Vellani Communion, whose aquatic species had lost 2 colony worlds to Keth, claims a century ago Senator Crix of the Borath Republic, whose people still paid tribute to the Keth from a war they had lost before humans, discovered Fire Delegate Mora of the Silken Courts, whose species had watched 3 allies fall to Keth aggression without being able to help, and Observer Prime Velthus of the Neutral Accords, who represented 12 species too small to defend themselves but too useful to destroy outright. Yoon placed a datapad on the table between them. In 36 hours, humanity will do something that will change the galaxy forever, she said. I am showing you this because your species voted against the Keth claim, and because I believe you deserve to know what is coming. She activated the display. The other 4 delegates watched in silence as she explained what Spring Thunder actually meant. When she finished, Representative Vex was the first to speak, his gills fluttering with emotion. This is impossible, he said. No species could coordinate something of this scale. Humanity has been preparing for 35 years, Yoon replied. We knew this day would come eventually, and we decided early on that we would never be victims. Senator Crix leaned forward, his rocky features unreadable. If you do this, the Concord will brand you as aggressors, he warned. Every treaty protection you have will vanish, and you will face the combined might of every species that fears what you have become. Yoon smiled that same strange smile that had unsettled Kiralax in the assembly chamber. That is why we are not going to break any treaties, she said. We are going to shatter them so completely that no one will be able to put them back together. And then we are going to build something better. She looked at each of them in turn. The question is whether your species will help us build it. The silence in the chamber stretched for a long moment. Then Delegate Mora's silk-covered form rustled with what might have been laughter. My people have been waiting for someone to stand up to the Keth for 600 years, she said. Show us what humanity can do. The final hours before the deadline passed with agonizing slowness on the 3 colony worlds. The last human transports lifted off and accelerated towards safe space. Keth warships gathered at the system's edge, ready to claim their prize the moment the deadline passed in 17 locations across 31 star systems. Human strike teams ran final checks on weapons that had been hidden in plain sight for decades, and on Vareth Prime Station, the assembly prepared for what they expected to be a routine transfer of territorial sovereignty. The countdown reached 0. The Keth fleet entered the first colony's orbital space and transmitted the formal claim of ownership that would be recorded in the Concord's archives forever. The command signal went out across human military networks, encrypted in a code that had never been used before, traveling through relay stations that had been placed years ago for exactly this moment. Admiral Park Seojin watched her display fill with confirmation signals from every strike team. All units ready, all targets acquired, all weapons armed, she thought about the 2.3 million colonists she was protecting. And she thought about the millions more who would become targets if humanity showed weakness now. She thought about her grandmother, who had survived the famines of the 22nd century by sheer determination, and her grandfather, who had helped build the first human starship with his own hands. She thought about every moment in human history when her species had faced impossible odds and refused to surrender. Then she gave the order, execute Spring Thunder. Across 31 star systems, in perfect synchronization down to the millisecond, every light flickered at once, and the galaxy changed forever. The Great Hall of Vareth Prime Station stretched for nearly a kilometer in every direction, and Ambassador Yoon My-rae had never felt smaller in her entire life. She stood at the human delegation's podium, a tiny figure in dark blue formal wear, surrounded by representatives of species that had traveled the stars when humanity still lived in caves. The Galactic Concord had existed for 12,000 years before humans discovered faster-than-light travel. And in the 40 years since humanity joined, they had learned one painful truth: the treaties that bound this alliance together were not meant to protect the weak. They were meant to give the strong a legal way to take whatever they wanted. The ancestral claim is valid, announced the speaker, a tall being made of crystalline formations that caught the light and scattered it across the chamber. The Keth Dominion has provided documentation proving their species occupied the three worlds in question before the Great Silence Period. Yoon wanted to scream that the Great Silence Period ended 8,000 years ago, that the Keth had abandoned those worlds and never returned, that humanity had terraformed them from frozen rocks into living gardens. But she had already made those arguments. Nobody cared, Counselor. Tefran rose from the Keth delegation's platform, his scaled hide gleaming under the chamber lights, and his forked tongue flickered with satisfaction as he addressed the assembly. "We thank the Concord for upholding justice," he said, his translator rendering his hissing speech into smooth galactic standard. "The Keth Dominion graciously offers the human colonists 72 hours to evacuate before we reclaim what has always belonged to us." 72 hours. 2.3 million people had built their lives on those worlds, and they had 72 hours to leave everything behind. Yoon looked around the chamber at the delegations who had voted in favor of this theft. 7 species had supported the Keth claim, and she could see the calculation in their alien eyes. They were already wondering what they could take from humanity. Next, in the observation gallery above the main floor, a small insectoid being named Kiralax watched the proceedings with growing unease. Kiralax served as an archivist for the Concord, one of the Velith species who had been recording galactic history for longer than most civilizations had existed. The Velith had no military, no territorial ambitions, and no voice in the assembly beyond their role as neutral observers. This made them perfect witnesses to injustice, and it meant they could do nothing about it. Kiralax had watched the Keth use this same legal trick against 7 other species over the centuries, and every time the pattern was the same. The victim species would protest and the assembly would rule against them, and they would comply because fighting meant expulsion from the Concord and the loss of all trade rights and protection. The humans would comply too, everyone always did, but as Kiralax watched the human ambassador's face, the archivist noticed something strange. Ambassador Yoon did not look defeated. She looked like someone waiting for something. "Does the human delegation wish to make a final statement?" The speaker asked. Yoon straightened her shoulders and looked directly at Counselor Tefran. "The human delegation acknowledges the assembly's decision," she said, and her voice carried no emotion at all. "We will begin evacuation procedures immediately." A ripple of surprise moved through the chamber. Most species argued and threatened and pleaded for more time. The humans were simply accepting their fate. Tefran's tongue flickered faster, a sign of pleasure among his kind. "The Keth Dominion appreciates humanity's wisdom in accepting the inevitable," he said. "Perhaps this experience will teach your young species to know your place in the galactic order." Yoon smiled, and something about that smile made Kiralax's antennae twitch with warning. "We have learned a great deal from the Concord," Yoon replied. "More than you know." She stepped down from the podium and walked toward the exit with her delegation. And as she passed the observation gallery, she glanced up at Kiralax. For just a moment, their eyes met. Then Yoon was gone, and the chamber erupted into the usual post-session chaos of delegations, networking and negotiating and celebrating their victories. Kiralax remained in the gallery for a long time, unable to shake the feeling that something important had just happened, something everyone else had missed. 3 hours later, Ambassador Yoon stood in her private office aboard the human diplomatic vessel and watched the evacuation. Orders go out to the 3 colony worlds. Her aide, a young man named Park Jin-ho, waited nervously by the door. The first transport ships are already departing from Earth, he reported. We can have evacuation capacity for all colonists within 60 hours. Yoon nodded without turning around. And the other matter? She asked. Jin-ho hesitated. Admiral Park confirms all units are in position, he said quietly. She awaits only your authorization to proceed with Spring Thunder. Yoon closed her eyes. She had hoped it would never come to this. When humanity first joined the Concorde, they had been so optimistic about their place in the galactic community, and it had taken less than 5 years to understand the truth. The treaties protected nothing, power protected everything, and humanity had spent the last 35 years quietly building power that no one suspected they possessed. Tell Admiral Park to proceed, Yoon said, and tell her I am sorry for what we are about to make her do. Jin-ho nodded and left the office. Yoon remained at the window, watching the stars that humanity had only recently learned to travel between. And she thought about the 2.3 million people packing their lives into boxes right now, because a species of reptilian bullies had found a legal loophole. She thought about her daughter, who had been born on one of those colony worlds, who had taken her first steps in the garden Yoon had planted with her own hands. She thought about the other species watching this happen, already planning their own claims against human territory, already dividing up the worlds they would take next. And she thought about the message she would deliver to the assembly in 72 hours, when every light in the galaxy would flicker at once and the Keth would learn what humanity had been preparing all along. The Treaties of the Galactic Concorde had stood for 12,000 years in one night. Humanity would shatter them completely, not because humans were violent or aggressive or warlike, but because humans understood something that older species had forgotten. Peace without justice was just another form of slavery, and humanity had never accepted chains. In her cabin aboard a cargo vessel officially registered as an agricultural supply transport, Admiral Park Seo-jin reviewed the final targeting data and felt the weight of history pressing down on her shoulders. 31 star systems, 17 strike groups. 1 hour of thunder that would change the galaxy forever. She was about to make humanity the most feared species in known space. She was about to save 2.3 million lives. She was about to break every treaty that bound civilization together. And as she authorized the final preparations, she wondered if the galaxy would ever forgive them. Then she remembered the smug satisfaction on Counselor Tethfrin's face, and she decided she did not care.